Begin today the Gemara at the bottom of Daf Mem Zayin Amud Beis, the very last line. The Gemara here brought a machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish regarding the mitzvah of bikurim. If you buy from someone his field, but you're not buying the guf of the karka itself, you don't own the actual property itself, all you own is the peiros, the fruits that grow on this property. So Rabbi Yochanan says that kinyan peiros is kinyan guf, even though you only own the produce that comes out of it, but it's like you own the property itself, and therefore when you bring bikurim, so besides bringing it to the Beis HaMikdash, there are psukim that you say to thank the Eibishter, and the pasuk there says that you thank the Eibishter for Pri Adom Asher Nasat Li. Says Rabbi Yochanan, you can read those psukim and say that the Eibishter has given me this land, even though you only own the fruits, because when you own the fruits of a land, it's like you own the land itself. The field is there for the fruits that grow from it, and you own the fruits. Shlakish says, no, kinyan peiros, laf kinyan guf dami, because you don't own the property itself, so you bring the bikurim, you cannot read these psukim to thank the Eibishter. So the Gemara here now says that there's another case where Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish argue. Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish follow their opinions in this case, which is really whenever you sell a field in Eretz Yisrael in the time of Yovel. The Itmer, we learned that they argued as follows. A person sells this field in the time period when there's Yovel. What happens Yovel? So anytime you sell any property in the time of Yovel, you're not really selling the property forever. The property is going back to its owner when Yovel comes. So it's basically the same as selling a property just for the usage of its fruits for a certain number of years. But the property itself is going back to the owner. Rabbi Yochanan says, maybe v'kaira. Nevertheless, it's like you own the field itself, and you can bring the fruits for bikurim and read the psukim and say that the Eibishter gave it to me. Shlakish says, maybe ve'ena kaira. You bring the fruits, but you can't read the psukim because it's Yovel. You don't own it. It's going back to its owner. Rabbi Yochanan, the Gemara explains that the machlokes says the same like we said before. Rabbi Yochanan, maybe the kaira, you bring it and you can read the psukim, kinyan peiros, kinyan guf dami. Owning these fruits for this number of years, it's like you own the body of the actual field itself. Reish Lakish says, maybe ve'ena kaira, you bring the bikurim and you can't read the psukim because kinyan peiros, the fruits that you own here, lav kinyan guf dami, you don't own the actual field itself, so you can't say adama shenasat li. It's not your property. So we have this machlokes.
He sold the field.
True, but the buyer has to give it back when Yovel comes. No, true, but Rashi, look at the first Rashi, and since it goes back in Yovel, so every time you sell a property in this time period, when Yovel applies, it's like you only sold a peiros. So the Gemara now explains, so we have this machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, b'chlal. When a person sells very clearly, he's saying specifically, I'm only selling you the peiros. And then over here, the Gemara now says that they also argued when you sell a property when Yovel exists. So it goes back to the owner. So the question is, why did Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish have to argue in both of these cases? It's the same point. It says the Gemara tzricha. It's necessary for them to spell out their opinions in both of these cases. If there were halacha, the machlokes of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish would have said only in this case, regarding when it was sold for the peiros, just for the fruits. So by ka'amar Reish Lakish, over there, when you made it very clear that the sale is only for the fruits, so there Reish Lakish said the chi kan naches adaita the peira kanachas, that when he goes into this field, he's only getting the rights, he's just buying it for the fruits. That's all he's there for. So therefore, over there, Reish Lakish said that you can't read the psukim to say that the Eibishter gave me this adama, this field here. But over here, when you buy a property, even though Taka goes back in Yovel, but over here, though, he's buying not just the peiros, he's buying the property itself. True, it has to go back in Yovel, but nevertheless, he's going down with the thinking that I'm getting the property itself. Right, and actually, the Mefarshim Rabbi explained, the pshat actually is that you do own the guf of the karka for this time period until Yovel comes. You don't just own the peiros, you're paying for the property itself. Then Yovel comes, you have to give it back. True, so you don't own the property forever, but for that time period, you do own the peiros, you do own the property itself. Ad kedei kach, that the Ketzos says about this, that the person that owns this property in this time period that he owns it, he can do whatever he wants to the property. He could dig in it. He can't just take the paytas alone and he has to leave the actual earth, the property itself alone. No, he can do whatever he wants with it. So for this time period, he actually owns the guf of the karka. So in such a case, I would say definitely Rish Lakish would agree that he should agree to Rabbi Yechanan that if he brings the bikurim from this property that he bought, he should be able to read and say it's Adomash and Asatali, it's his. So that's what Rish Lakish is saying, that even in this case, because you have to give it back in Yovel, so Torah tells you that you own the property, but just for this time period. You don't really own it. The Eibusha didn't give it to you forever. Now then, if we would only say the machlokes regarding selling this property when it goes back in Yovel, I would say Baha Kamer Rabbi Yechanan. Only here Rabbi Yechanan said that the kinyan of the peiros is kinyan aguf because for this time period you really own it fully. But when you clearly specify that you're only selling the peiros, I would say he agrees to Rish Lakish that owning the peiros is not equivalent to owning the actual property itself. Therefore, Rabbi Yechanan says his opinion there as well, that buying the peiros is an ownership in the karka itself.
So, if you buy it in the years that are in between Yovel, only for 5 years in between, so then you could say
okay.
But if you say I'm buying it until Yovel, you shouldn't be able to say
it's always till Yovel. I mean, that's what the Torah says. There's no nafka mina whether you specify, whether you don't.
No, but if I buy specific, okay, then
it doesn't make any difference what the person says. It always goes till Yovel.
The point trying to bring out that according to the Shlokas, if you say till Yovel, is so you should never say
no, okay. Tashama, the Gemara brings a raya from a Mishnah actually. So the Mishnah says as follows regarding the halacha of bikurim. Hakaine ilon v'karkoi, a person buys one tree with the piece of land that's there with this tree. So even though he only owns this one tree, there could be a big orchard, but nevertheless, maybe v'kaine, he could bring from this one tree that's his with the piece of land that he owns, and he brings and he can read the psukim. So the Gemara understands at this point that Mishnah is talking about the time period in the Beis HaMikdash when there was Yovel. So this property that you bought is going back to its original owner, but nevertheless you can bring the peiros and read the psukim. So you see over here, like Rabbi Yechanan said, that the ownership is considered to be a real ownership that you can say the psukim. Says the Gemara, it's no raya from there, because that Mishnah is speaking about in a time period bizman she'ein haYovel nayig, when the Yovel there was no Yovel anymore, so therefore, once you buy even it's a little piece of karka, but it's yours forever. So therefore you can say the psukim. When is the time that there was no Yovel? According to most Rishonim in the second Beis HaMikdash, there was no Yovel. According to Rabbeinu Tam in Tosfos before in Daf Lamed Vav, he says that in the second Beis HaMikdash there was Yovel, but in the time period towards the end of the first Beis HaMikdash, when Sancherev exiled 10 of the Shvatim from Eretz Yisrael, and you didn't have all the Yidden living in Eretz Yisrael, that time period there was no Yovel. Another ayat, Tashama, the Mishnah there says, Hakaine Shnei Yulanis, B'teich Sadei Shel Chavera. You buy two trees in your friend's field. So you're just buying the trees. You're not buying the actual karka as well with it. So maybe Veina Kaina. So you can bring the bikurim from the fruits that grow, but you can't say the psukim because the adama, the field is not yours. So the Gemara says, what do we understand from this? Hashloisha. But if you buy 3 trees, then maybe v'kaira. Then you could bring the bikurim and you could read the psukim and say that the property, the field is mine as well. Why? Because the halacha is once you buy three trees, so then you get the rights also for a certain minimum amount of property around it that you actually own the adama itself. So again, you see over here that you buy it and you buy it with the adama, you can bring and then read the psukim. So this shows like Rabbi Yechanan that even though it goes back in Yovel, you can still read the psukim. And says the Gemara, Hachanami, Bizman she'ena Yovel nayik. Like we said before, this Mishnah as well is in a time period when there was no Yovel, so you bought it, it's yours forever. Now the Gemara says though, V'hashte, the Omer Rav Chisda. Now that Rav Chisda came and clarified the following point regarding the machlokes of Rabbi Yechanan and Rish Lakish. And he said, Machlokes b'Yovel sheni. The argument between them was only when it came already to the second Yovel. After the Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael and it was the second Yovel. So Yidden had already experienced one Yovel where all the property that was sold went back to the original owner. Now it's a second Yovel, so it's a second Yovel. Everybody knows good and well that what you're buying is just for a number of years and it's going back in Yovel. And you're buying it with that mindset.
How many years?
Yovel is once in 50 years. Avol b'yovel rishain. But if we're talking about a property that was sold in the time period before the very first Yovel, when Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael was, so then Divrei HaKoil, everybody will agree, Mevi v'Kaira, that you can bring these fruits and you can read the psukim as well, because Dakati leisamech datayu, because people are not yet in that mindset thinking about the fact that it's going back in Yovel. When you buy a property, you're thinking that you're buying it, the property is now mine. Right? So, like I said before, the emes is that whenever you buy a property, even though it goes back in Yovel, you're buying the peiris and the gufa karka as well. Elamai, because it's not yours forever, you can't really say Adamash and Asatali. What Rav Chisda is saying, the svar over here is, it depends on the smichas das of the person. To what extent, how do you feel about this property that you bought? Presently, it's yours. In the future, you're going to have to give it up. So by the first Yovel, that future was not something that actually ever happened yet, so the person feels like this is completely mine now. So he can say the psukim and thank the Eibishter for that. He feels like he can thank the Eibishter for that. But once it was already the first Yovel, you know that this is going back like it once happened before, so you can't fully, with a full heart, thank the Eibishter for giving you this property. It's not yours forever. So now, based on what Rav Chisda said, so going back to these Mishnahs that we quoted before, that says that you can bring from a property that you bought, you can bring and read the psukim, like Kashya, there's no question from there, because Haba Yovel Rishain, Haba Yovel Sheni. Over here, they were arguing when in a case when it was after the second Yovel, and those Mishnahs are talking about when it was before the first Yovel. So over there, the person feels like he owns it now completely, and therefore it says there may be v'kaira that he could read the psukim. Okay, now the Gemara brings another place where it seems like that this machlekes of Rabbi Yechon and Rish Lakish is already a machlekes Tanoim. Leime, shall we say, ketanoi, that their machlekes is the machlekes of the following Tanoim here. So what's this machlekes? So before we read inside, Rashi gives here an introduction. There's two kinds of properties that a person could own in Eretz Yisrael. One is called Esdei Achuzah, and the other is called Esdei Mikneh. What's the difference between them? Esdei Achuzah literally means a property that you inherited. Esdei Mikneh means a property that you bought. And the halacha is b'negei to when you, if in any of these cases you will makdish them, you gave them away to hektish, and then when Yovel comes, they don't have the same halacha. By Esdei Achuzah, if you gave it to hektish, what does hektish do with a piece of property that they own? Hektish that has nothing to do with a piece of real estate. Hektish will usually sell it and then use the money for what it needs in the Beis HaMikdash. So if you sell that piece of property, if Hektish that is sold that piece of property, when Yovel comes, it does not go back to the original owner. It goes back to the Kainim. The Kainim, the field does not remain by the buyer after Yovel, but it goes out to the Kainim. But if there's a stay mikneh, if you bought a property in Eretz Yisrael and then you gave it to Hektish, what does Hektish do with it? Hektish sold it to someone. When Yovel comes, so the buyer has to give it back to the original owner of this property. It does go back to the original owner, it does not go to the Kainim. Okay, so that's the two halachas between a stei achuzah of a property that you inherited or a property that you acquired. So now this Mishnah over here says, or maybe a Braisa, so there's a machlekes about this as follows: Minayin lulikeach sadeh mi'aviv. What happens if a person bought a property in Eretz Yisrael, but who did he buy it from? He bought it from his own father, which eventually he would inherit one day. But he went and bought it now from his father. V'higdisha, and he gave it away to Hektish. V'achakach meis aviv, and then after this, his father passes away. And now after his father passes away, so this is a property that he would inherit now from his father, but he already bought it from before. So the halacha here is, Minayim, from where do we know, Shetehei lefanov kisdei achuzah, that this property has the halacha of a sdei achuzah, of a property that you inherited, not a halacha of a property that you acquired, even though you already bought it before you inherited it. So how could you say you inherited this property? It was already yours from before. But nevertheless, it has the halacha of a stei achuzah. Where do we know this chiddush from? Talmud Loimar, the pasuk says, Im estei miknasai. If it was a field that you bought, ashaloi mistei achuzasai, which you did not inherit, so these are extra words. Once it says that it's a stei miknasai, that this is a property that you bought, why does the pasuk have to spell out, and it's not a property that you inherited? Obviously, if you bought it, you did not inherit it. So we learn out from these extra words, Sadeh she'eino ru'uya liyos sdei achuzah, that it has to be a property that is not possible for you to inherit. Yatzazazu, so that excludes this case here of a child that buys the property from his father, even though he acquired it. So he didn't actually inherit it because it was his before his father passed away, but he bought a property from his father, which he should have inherited. So since this is a property that he could have inherited from his father, this has the halacha of a zdei achuza and not of a zdei mikna. That's the chiddush of this pasuk here. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Shimon. This is Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon's opinion. Rab Meir disagrees and says, no, this pasuk is teaching me a chiddush, but not these extra words here is teaching me a chiddush, but not this chiddush. Teaches me less of a chiddush. And he says as follows: Minayin, from where do I know? Lulekeyach sademi aviv. A person bought this property from his father. Umeis aviv. And now before this person went and was makdish this to hektish, his father passed away. And afterwards, this person went and was makdish it to hektish. After the father already passed away. How do I know that because he was makdish after the father passed away, that it's considered to be a stei achuzah? Now halachas apply like a stei achuzah, and it goes to the kohenim when Yovel comes. Talmud loymar, because we learn it from this pasuk, im esdei miknasai ashaloi misdei achuzasai. And so the pasuk spells out it's not a stei achuzah. Why does it have to spell it out? Say that it's extra. Sodeh she'ein a stei achuzah. A field that's not an inheritance. Yatzazazu shehi stei achuzah. But this field, even though you already bought it from before, but nevertheless it is considered to be a stei achuzah because the father passed away before you were makdish it. So since the father passed away before that, so because he passed away, you have the power to inherit it even without the fact that you acquired it. Okay, so what's the machlokes here? What's the machlokes between Rab Meir and Rab Yehuda and Rab Shimon? Rab Yehuda and Rab Shimon say that even if you went and you were makdish it before the father passed away, so this is really a pure stei mikna. You just acquired it from the father and you were makdish it while it was a stei mikna. The father only passed away later. Nevertheless, we treat it like a stei achuzah because this is a property that was owned by your father and could have and should have been a stei achuzah. Rab Meir says no. That in such a case, it's a stei mikna. You bought it and you were makdish it before the father passed away. Only if the father passed away before and then you were makdish it, then it has a halacha of a stei achuzah. Okay, so not such a that's less of a chiddush. So what we have to understand over here is, what's the pshat on this machlokes? The Gemara will explain here that it will depend on this shaila of whether kinyan peiris is kinyan aguf. If you acquire something in the time of yovel, so that's only a kinyan for peiris, it's not a full kinyan, is that considered to be a full kinyan, equivalent to a full kinyan like kinyan aguf, or not? Says the Gemara. So what do we understand over here from this machlokes? Just a second. Now, so first of all, like this: V'ilo l'Rab Yehuda v'Rab Shimon. So we understand there now. Well, what's Rab Yehuda and Rab Shimon's opinion? Meis aviv v'acha kach hekdisha. If it was a case where the father first passed away, and then this son that bought this property was makdish it, so lo tzrich ekra. For such a case, you don't need a pasuk to say that we treat it like a stei achuzah. Because if Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon would hold that you need a pasuk to teach me in this case that it's a stei achuzah, then Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon couldn't say the bigger chiddush that even if you were makdish it before the father passed away, that it's still a stei achuzah. That case they held does not need a pasuk. So that's really what the machlokes revolves around. In this case, do you need a pasuk or not? So my love, don't you think that the basis of the machlokes is as follows? And here, what the Gemara is basically going to explain is, when you acquire a property from your father, and then the father passes away, and you inherit it from him. Inheriting that property that you already bought before, is there anything additional that you just got now? Is there anything new that happened? Could you even say that this is called an inheritance? If you already acquired it, how is there any inheritance over here? The answer is, the point the Gemara is going to explain over here, well, it depends if when you acquired it before, is this a full acquisition or not? Here, we're speaking about a time period when yovel goes on. So if there's yovel, when you bought it, this property would have to go back to the father when yovel comes. Once you inherit it, it does not go back to the father once yovel comes. You inherit it. The father's not alive anymore. So that's really the question over here. When you inherit it, after you bought it, did you get something more than the fact that you inherit that you bought it? So here, the Gemara explains as follows. So my lav b'haka mifligi. Don't you think the argument over here is as follows? That Rav Meir's opinion is kinyan peiris kinyan agufdami. That when you bought the field from the father, so it's a time when there's yovel, so it's only a kinyan for peiris, but it's equivalent to buying the entire property, like you own it fully, and therefore ubaha in such a case b'misas aviv hu d'lo yaris v'lo midi. If the father now passes away, you're not getting anything more through this inheritance. You already own it fully before. So what is the inheritance adding? So vehilkach, therefore, meis aviv v'achakach hekdisha. Therefore, Rab Meir held, if the father passed away, and then after the father passed away, you will makdish this property. Really, what should be the halacha with this property? It should be considered a state mikneh, because there is no aspect of inheritance over here. You already own it fully. So tzarich kra, for this, according to Rab Meir, we need this extra pasuk that's teaching me to say that nevertheless it's considered to be like a zdei achuzah, and if you makdish it, the halacha of zdei achuzah will apply, which is that when Yovel comes, it goes to the kohenim. That's Rab Meir's opinion. But Rab Yehuda, Rab Shimon Savri, on the other hand, Rab Yehuda and Rab Shimon's opinion is kinyan peiris lafka kinyan agufdami. When you bought this field from your father, you're just buying it for the peiris. And it's not equivalent to buying the actual field itself. Yovel is going to come, it goes back to the father. So therefore now what happens when the father passes away and you inherit it? Ubaha, in such a case, the misasava, when the father passes away, hashtahu the kayaris. This is a real Yerusha. The Yerusha adds something to your acquisition before. Now you're getting it eternally. That won't go back in Yovel. So vehilkach, so therefore according to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, meis aviv, in a case where he bought it from his father, and then the father passed away, and and afterwards you will makdish this property. You don't need a pasuk to teach me a chiddush that this is a property that you inherited. It's obvious, because even though you already bought it before you inherited it, but you only bought the peitis, because it goes back in Yovel. Now you fully inherited it. So obviously it's going to have a halacha of zdei achuzah. You don't need a pasuk for that. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon said, and when we have this extra pasuk teaching me that it has as zdei achuzah, even though you bought it, lehigdisha va'achakach meisaviv. So the case over here is that you will makdish it first, and only afterwards did the father pass away. But nevertheless, even though you will makdish it before you inherited it, for this I need the chiddush of the pasuk that since this is a property that you could have inherited, that itself gives it the halacha of zdei achuzah. That's what it seems like the machlokes over here is. So basically the point that the Gemara is saying is, when you buy from a father and then you inherit, is the inheriting adding anything to the acquisition before? That depends on the nature of the sale before. Is that kinyan peiris full, kekinyan aguf, so then the inheriting later adds nothing? Or I say no, the sale before is just a kinyan peiris, so the inheritance later does add something. So for that I don't need a pasuk. That's what it seems like the machlokes over here is. So to this, the Gemara responds and says, Omer Rav Nachman by Yitzchak. Rav Nachman Yitzchak says, not necessarily is this the machlekes. Loi lo mei malach. Really, I could answer you and tell you, Ba'alma kasavri Rav Yehuda Rav Shimon. Usually, Rav Yehuda and Rav Shimon will agree, kinyan peiris ke kinyan aguf dami, that buying the peiris, buying a property for its peiris, is equivalent to buying the property itself. So if that's the case, if it's mamish equivalent to buying the property itself, so when you inherit the property, so the inheritance doesn't add anything. It's over here. L'chayre, the chiddush of the pasuk should be in a case where the father passed away, and then you will makdish it, and the inheritance doesn't add anything. Why did Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon say that in that case there's no chiddush? That in that case the inheritance does add something. Why did they come and say a bigger chiddush to say that even if you will makdish it before the father passed away, still it has a halacha of zdei achuzah? So the answer is V'hacha Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Shimon Kra Ashkechu V'Darish. It's because they held that if you look closer into the words of the pasuk here, you'll see that there's something extra in the pasuk that teaches me even this bigger chiddush. Because Lichtev Rachmane, so as I pointed out before, this entire line in the pasuk is extra. When it says Imes Dei Miknosai, and then it adds the words Asher Loi Misdei Achuzasai, those four words are extra. Asher Loi Misdei Achuzasai. Okay, but now the Gemara says there's another extra point there in the pasuk, because Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon says that it says in Misdei Muknosai Ashaloi Achuzasai Mai Misdei Achuzasai. It could have written Ashaloi Achuzasai, which is not an inheritance. But that extra word Misdei Achuzasai, why does it have to say Misdei Achuzasai? So you have two things that are extra over here. Not only does it say asher lo yachuzasai, but it adds mizdei achuzasai. So that teaches me Sada she'eno ru'uya liyastei achuzah, that only as a halacha of a property that you bought and not a property that you inherited, if it wasn't roi b'chlal, if you couldn't have inherited Yotzazu, and therefore that excludes this case, and this is the source of the bigger chiddush that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon taught, that in this property she'ru'uya liyastei achuzah, the very fact that it could have been an inheritance, that itself is a reason why that it has a halacha like a stei achuzah. So even though Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon hold that kinyan peiris is kekinyan aguf, so in reality it's not a stei achuzah at all. But the very fact that it could have been a stei achuzah because you bought it from your father, that's enough that it has the halacha of a stei achuzah. Amar Rabbi Yosef. Now Rabbi Yosef said regarding Rabbi Yochanan's opinion that says that when you buy a property, so it has a halacha of kinyan peiris, has a halacha of kinyan aguf, and therefore any time there's yovel, so you bring the fruits, so you could has a halacha of kinyan aguf. So again, let's see here the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yosef, Ilav the Amar Rabbi Yochanan, kinyan peiris, kinyan aguf dami. If not for the fact that Rabbi Yochanan said that when you buy a property in the time when there's yovel, so even though it goes back in yovel, but nevertheless it's considered to be yours 100%, and you could bring the bikurim properly and read the psukim and thank the Eibishter for it. So he wouldn't find his hands and feet when he was in the Beis Medrash, which means that it would come out to be something very, very strange according to his opinion. What is this? Ravasi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan as follows: Ha'achin shecholku, we had this already before here in this Masechta, brothers that divide the inheritance of their father, they divide the properties, lukuchaysein. The halacha is that these brothers, it's like they acquired it from each other, meaning that you have all the properties together, and now when each one gets their portion, it's like they exchanged it. I get my portion in exchange for the fact that you get your portion. So it's like a sale where they're exchanging with one and the other. And therefore, what's the halacha in such a case? When yovel comes, this division of the properties for the brothers has to go back, and they're going to have to divide it again, because the halacha of yovel applies to any buyers. It does not apply to a Yerusha, but it does apply by buyers. So therefore, when the children divide the property, it's considered to be like a sale, and it goes back in yovel. Now, we had this before in the Masechta. What is this based on? This is based on the halacha of ein breida. If you hold yesh breida, so then what that means is, the moment the father passed away, so once they divide it, we say retroactively that really this was your property from the beginning, and this was your property from the beginning, and it's not like I bought from you and you bought from me and we exchanged with each other. No, now it's retroactively clarified that this was my inheritance. That's a Yerusha. But Rabbi Yochanan says, ein breida. So even after they divide it, so it doesn't retroactively clarify that this was mine, but it's like I got my portion in exchange for you got, and we bought it from each other. So it goes back in yovel. So now says the Gemara, if so, if you're going to say that for every sale, in the time when there's yovel, since it goes back by yovel, it's not equivalent to actually owning the property itself, and you can't do the mitzvah of bikurim properly. So if so, you're not going to have the halacha of a person bringing bikurim properly to say the psukim and thank the Eibishter for it, elo chad bar chad ad Yeshua banun, unless you're an only child, and your father's the only child, and the father's the only child, all the way going back to Yeshua Benum when they came to Eretz Yisrael, and it's all one only child. So then you got an inheritance. There's no sale, there's no aspect of lekuchais. The moment it's not an only child, and you have to divide the properties between brothers, so then it has a halacha of a lekeach, and then that means it goes back in yovel, so you can't say the psukim. So Rabbi Yochanan, which is the one that said that it's lekuchais, he also holds that it's the kinyan of the peiris is equivalent to kinyan aguf. So therefore, according to him, you could say the psukim when you bring the bikurim. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan sort of must have said what he said, that kinyan peiris is kinyan aguf, in order to explain how all of Klal Yisrael is able to fulfill the mitzvah of bikurim properly.
So who is it the Lukuch is going back to? After the father passed away,
they're gonna have to just redivide it again. That's all. They're gonna have to redivide the properties again. Here, there's a long taisus on this, and there's also a big discussion all in the Mefarshim about this, because here the Gemara is saying that in Rabbi Yochanan's opinion this fits. Rabbi Yochanan holds ein breida, and therefore the inheritance is considered to be lekuchais. And Rabbi Yechanan also holds that kinyan peiris is kinyan aguf, so you own the property itself, even though it's going back in Yovel, and you could say the psukim. But Taisus over here points out that lahalacha it doesn't exactly fit, because we paskin like Rish Lakish that kinyan peiris is not kinyan aguf. So if it goes back in Yovel, you don't really own the property fully. And on the other hand, we paskin that ein breire, which would mean that by every inheritance, it's like a lekuchais and it goes back in Yovel. So Taisus says, so then how could anybody bring bikurim and read the psukim? Okay, so Taisus has over here a few answers for this, and there's a big discussion about this, according to the Rambam as well. Okay.
We also have to understand that the bottom line is the difference between state mikna and state chuzasek.
One second. That the one okay, state mikna and state chuzasek is a different. That's the halacha b'negei to going back in Yovel if it goes to the kainim or it goes. Okay, but over here we're talking about bikurim. It's a different mitzvah, two different inyanim. Yeah, this is the mitzvah of bikurim.
Right. But it's over there.
Yeah, nachanami. Omar Rave. So now Rave says kra umasnite nesayile leirish lakish. Both the pasuk itself and a braisa is a proof for Rish Lakish's opinion. How? Kra, the pasuk, the proof for Rish Lakish in the pasuk is, it says, "B'mispa shnei tvuos yimkalach." When the pasuk describes a sale in the time when there's yovel, it says, "What are you selling? You're selling the number of years for this person to use the tvua, the grain that's growing in the field." So the pasuk is clearly saying that you're not selling the property itself. It's just shnei tvuos, years to use tvua. That's exactly what Rish Lakish said. That you just own the peiris, but you don't own the property itself. Masnite. And we also have a raya from the Lashon from what it says, a halacha and a braise. The Tanya, the braise says the following halacha. Now here the braise speaks about the fact that a b'chor gets a double portion. But there's a limitation to this halacha. A b'chor only gets a double portion for anything that is in the inheritance there when the father passes away. If there's money that is not yet in the father's possession when he passes away, but the father's going to get paid this money later, or it's roy, meaning it's going to come to the father later after he passes away, but he doesn't currently have it, you don't get a double portion. So the Brayser says, if the father passed away, and the father, when he was alive, sold the property, and now after the father passes away, Yovel comes and the property is returned now. So now the children have this property as an inheritance. The B'chor gets a double portion. So the question is, why did he get a double portion? When the father passed away, it wasn't in the father's possession. Yovel only happened later. The answer is, this is a raya to what Rish Lakish is saying, because even before Yovel comes, the property was never fully sold. The property was just a kinyan of peiris. The guf of the karka did belong to the father. So therefore, the halacha of the B'chor getting a double portion applies to this. It's considered to be that it's always still the father's property. Now, based on this, again, we're talking here about the karka. The whole discussion is Amar Abaye. Based on this, Abaye says a similar halacha regarding the wife's properties that she brings into the marriage. This is the nichse melug. What could the husband do with these properties? He can use the peiris. So naktinon. Over here, we know that halacha will be as well. Baal b'nichse ishtoi, a husband that wants to go and if there's somebody that is an argument regarding this property here that he has to go to a dintaita with, but it's not really, the property doesn't belong to the husband. It's his wife's property, but the husband uses the peiris. Tzarech harsha. He's going to have to get a document from his wife, which is called a harsha, that she's giving the rights of ownership completely to the husband. If she's not going to give the husband this harsha, this document that gives him the rights of ownership to go to this din taira, so then the husband can't go to a din taira for this. Why not? Because he only owns the peiris. He doesn't own the guf of the karka. Since we're paskening like Rish Lakish, that when you own the peiris, you have no rights to the karka itself. So if there's a din taira about the actual property itself, you can't go into the din taira to this person unless you get from the wife a document that says that you have rights over it. But the Gemara says, but that's only if this din taira is not regarding the fruits of this property. It's only about the actual ownership of the property. So you're going to have to get this document of harsha from your wife to be able to go to this din taira. But once the din taira is about the peiris of the karka as well, so since you're a baldin for that, since you could be there in the din taira for the peiris, so you could get involved in this din taira even for the actual property itself, even without getting this harsha from your wife. But again, this is all based on the opinion of Rish Lakish that the kinyan of the peiris is not the kinyan aguf dami. Hadran halacha sheleach. This is the conclusion of the fourth Perek of Masechta Gittin, Perek HaSheleach.
According to Torah, you can't represent the wife.
A person could say, "La bal dvarim didiyat." There's no such a thing as representing your wife. You can't. There's no la bal dvarim didiyat. If you're not the owner, you can't come into Adon Torah. If the argument is about the goof of the karka, you only own the paytas. Who are you? That's the halacha always by every Adon Torah. Let's begin. Let's begin. Yeah. Well, no, the halacha of a lawyer is a different thing. Of a tayin, but the actual baldin has to be there. It's no such a thing as the wife staying home and the husband just coming for her. Okay, so the next Perek will begin with a subject that's not at all directly related to the halachas of Gittin, but this is continuing the halachas of Tikkun Olam, things the Chachamim were masakin. Sagt Heilige Mishnah, Hani Zokin. When you come to collect the money of damages that someone caused you, Shomin Lahan Be'idis. You can collect from Idis. So as we'll see here in this Mishnah, when it comes to the quality of a property, there's three kinds of properties. There's Idis, a very good quality. There's Baininus, which is a middle level. And then there's Ziburis, which is an inferior level of quality of this property. So a person would rather get Idis instead of having this massive property, which is a bad quality. And you can't really plant in it, you can't do much with it. So he'd rather have a smaller property, but it should be a good quality. So by Nizakin, if someone damaged you and he owes you money and he can't pay you and you have to collect from his properties, you have the right to collect from the best. If someone owes you money from a loan, you can collect from a middle level of a quality of a property. Ksubas isha, when a woman comes to collect the money for her ksuba, biziburis. She collects from the most inferior level of the property. So this is all, as we'll see here, tikkun olam. This is all Chachamim made this takana. Rab Meir says, ksubas isha, a woman collecting her ksuba is also bebenis. She can collect the middle level of the quality of property. Another halacha of tikkun olam, ein Ephraim and nechasim mishubadim. If someone owes you money, and there's properties that he presently has in his possession, and then there's properties that he owned, and there was a lien on those properties, but he sold them off already. That's always called nechasim mishubadim. You cannot collect from nechasim mishubadim, from those buyers that bought it, from this person that owes you the money, if he still has properties that are b'nei chayrin, that are free, that are there in his possession to collect from. Even if these properties that he has are inferior quality and the other properties that he sold off are better quality, doesn't matter. You have to take from the properties that he currently has in his possession. Another tikkun olam, ein nefraim minichse yisayim. You can never get paid if you're collecting money from yisayim element aziburis. You could only take from yisayim from the most inferior properties. Another halacha, and here this next din is speaking about a case where a person bought a property from someone, and the seller took responsibility with a proper document that if it turns out that this property that I'm selling you is not mine, I will reimburse you for this. And what happens if it actually ends up happening? The buyer, someone comes over to him one day and says, "Who did you buy this property from?" "I bought it from this guy." "You bought it from him? It belongs to me. It's my property. He stole it from me." So obviously the real owner, which is called the nigzal, takes back his property. Now the problem is, what happens if this buyer invested in this property? He improved the property, he paid his gru on the property, doesn't matter. The nigzal, the real owner, takes it all back for himself. And now the gazlan, which was the seller here, this gazlan is going to have to reimburse this person for what happened over here. He took responsibility to reimburse him, right? But now there's two things that he has to reimburse him for. He has to reimburse him for the actual property that he bought, but he also has to reimburse him for the paytas that grew on this property now, or the improvement of the property. So the halacha actually is, the real owner, the nigzal, he will have to pay this buyer for any money that he spent for the hitzos, for any money that he invested in improving the property. But the actual improvement, the fact that the property is now worth more money, the actual paytas that grew in it, the nigzal, the real owner, doesn't have to pay for this at all. So the gazlan, the seller has to, which is the gazlan really, he has to pay for this. So on this, there's a takana as follows: Ein moitziin lachilas peiris ul shvach karkois. So the fact that this seller, which is a gazlan, turns out now that he's a gazlan, so the fact that he has to reimburse the buyer for the fruits that grew on this property, or l'shvach karkois, or for the improvement of this property that the buyer improved the karka, So you don't get paid for this only from the chosim b'nei chayrin. As the Mishnah here will finish off again. So the point here that the Mishnah is saying is this, that the Gazlan has to reimburse the buyer for the actual property itself, that the buyer could go and collect even from the chosim mishubadim. But the paytis and the shvach of the karkayas that he has to reimburse him for, that he could only collect from the chosim b'nei chayrin. He could only collect from properties that he has in his possession right now. As the Mishnah will finish off here. And the same is also ulamazin ha'isha v'habonis, the halacha that you have to feed a wife or you have to feed the daughters after the husband or the father passes away. They could only collect this money or to be fed min chasim mishubadim, only from they cannot collect from the chasim mishubadim. They can only collect from the properties that are right now in the possession of the Yershim. This is all mipnei tikkun olam. All these halachas are because of tikkun olam, as will be explained in the Gemara. The final halacha here of this Mishnah, which is tikkun olam, person that finds a lost object, lo yishava, he does not have to swear about what he found, mipnei tikkun olam. What happens if the owner comes and says, you're giving me back this, you took half of it for yourself, this is not what you found more. Swear to me that you didn't find more than this. He doesn't have to swear. Whatever you found, that's what he gives back. Mipnei tikkun olam, this is also tikkun olam, as we'll see in the Gemara. Okay, so going back to the very first halach of the Mishnah, it said that if someone is coming to collect damages, he collects from the best property, and that's only a tikkun olam. For the Gemara, it's only tikkun olam. This is manat Torah. The pasuk says, "Meitav sadeyu or meitav karma yishalim." The beginning of that pasuk says, "Ki yaverish sada yikerem." If your animal went into someone's property and damaged it, so you have to pay for the damages. What do you pay from? If he's coming to collect from the properties of the mazik, you have to take from the best. Amar Abaye, so Abaye says, "Leitzricha el Rabbi Shmuel." Chiddush of our Mishnah here is according to Rabbi Shmuel's opinion. The Amar Rabbi Shmuel says, "Midda oiraisa that mina teire b'dinizik shaiminon." How do we estimate what's considered to be idis, the best property? We estimate by the standard of the person that got damaged. Right? Let's say the person that got damaged, his best property for the mazik is much richer than the nizik. For the mazik, he has much better quality properties. The ziburis, the worst property of the mazik is in the properties of the nizik is considered to be idis. He's a poor person, so for him, his best is by the mazik is his ziburis. So Rabbi Shmuel says you only get according to the standard, your standard. You're a poor person, so you get on your standard, only on the standard of the nizik that's coming to collect. Kamash malon. So that's the chiddush of our Mishnah. Mipnei tikkun olam shaiminam b'demazik. The chachamim came and they were misakin that a mazik has to give from his best, from actually his best, not from the standard of the nizik, but from the standard of the mazik himself. If he's a rich guy and he has very good quality karka, he's going to have to give from his best. So Chachamim were misakin this, so a person should be careful not to be mazik someone. So here the Gemara is going to bring the source of this halacha. Where do we see this machlekes of Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva? Okay, we'll stop over here because it goes all the way down to the next Amud. Here, the source where you see Rabbi Shmuel holds, but the nizik sheminam.
What's taking that on?
That's in order to mod that it should be a stronger knas, that he should be careful that not to be mazik. So he'll know that he has to give away his best property. He'll be more careful.
Like this,